This is the High School Football Preview Show with Mike Wenmacher, Tim Schweitzer, Steve Bridge, and Derek Paris on 97.7 and 970 WMAY, Springfield's news and talk.
It is the High School Football Preview Show State Semifinal Edition. I am Mike Wenmacher, joined as always. But you can hear him on the SHG broadcast, Tim Schweitzer. You can hear him on the Rochester Rocket broadcast, Steve Bridge. And you see him everywhere because there's so much going on in high school sports around the area. From Channel 1450, it's Derek Paris. And gentlemen, just when we think SHG Rochester can't up the ante, they find a way to do it. Another instant classic in the quarterfinals, a 41-35 overtime thriller. Rochester wins. Tim, we will start with the SHG side of things, though. What went right in that game? What went wrong? And overall thoughts on the Cyclones season?
Cyclones were able to run the ball a little better than they had in the game 3 weeks prior, and Cam Brinkman was terrific again. Drew Ward was an all-star, and you know what? Their offensive line, for all the struggles that Rochester can cause for opponents, I thought the Sacred Heart Griffin offensive line did pretty well. I think they only sacked Cam Brinkman on the first series. Of course, he was under duress all night, but other than that, they did pretty well on offense. They never had the lead in the game, and they'd fall behind a touchdown, and then they'd catch him. They'd fall behind a touchdown, then they'd catch him. Fall behind a touchdown, then they'd catch him. It was that way all night. And at the end, we had a complete overtime thriller that the crowd that was enormous seemed to really eat up. I think everybody had a great time, and they certainly got their money's worth in that quarterfinal game at Rochester.
And do you feel, Tim, it's Cam Brinkman's second year as a starter. Obviously, you're looking forward to him next year. What do you feel for the Cyclones team they take away from this? Obviously, the defeat, and you feel that in your bones. How's that going to motivate them going forward? So
many stars on this team were juniors, and they'll be back, and they need to be healthy. Another thing, some of the seniors they lose were pretty darn good too. And so Sacred Heart Griffin's going to have to develop from below, make sure the sophomores and incoming freshmen can fill in some spots. But they really made a priority in last offseason of getting bigger and stronger. And they're going to need to bring that same energy to the offseason weight work this year, because it really did pay off. I'm not sure the coaches were fully confident that all the work they put in the offseason was going to develop, but it developed, and they were pretty good as a result, even with all the injuries they had during the course of the season.
Derek, obviously you were there covering the game. What was some of your takeaways from this instant classic between the Cyclones and the Rockets?
Yeah, I think I want to start with SHG just to follow up what Tim said. I mean, so many juniors on that class, and Cam Brinkman finishing up his second season as starter. It was just one of those games where, Rochester scored, it went to overtime. Obviously either team could have won that game. And it was, like you said, an instant classic. It was a heavyweight fight. And many people say, it might've been the state championship game, but I mean, it's one of those where you saw both teams go blow for blow and just answer and answer and answer. And you saw Cam Brinkman avoid the pressure so much that, in my piece this week with the Rochester D-line, they talked about how elusive he was and how amazing he was at just keeping those plays alive, finding guys like Drew Ward and just, doing it with his legs as well. So, I mean, all those guys coming back, you got Joe Kepler, Bryce Kraft, Cam Brinkman, all those guys just getting another year of experience, getting a quarterfinal run. I mean, so many great things to take away from an SHG team this year. It's got to be heartbreaking. It's got to be also motivating for them to lose the 3 games that they did the way they did, 2 of them to Rochester, 1 of them to Chatham, where that's going to stick with you and that's going to motivate you, I think, throughout the season. And then in terms of Rochester, a lot of people said, hey, I expected Rochester to win that game by, 2 scores. And if you watch that game, you understand just how good it was and how evenly matched those 2 teams were. And I think that speaks to, just the experience both coaching staffs have against each other, and also just, how good these 2 teams are coming out of the Central State 8. Rochester proved, that they were the better team, winning twice. But I mean, that's a very slim margin between these 2 teams this year. And so I think by them winning that game, they kind of take a lot of pride in knowing SHG was a really good team. Rochester is still, getting healthier and healthier, I think. And they're ready for a big test this week against Bree Central.
So let's get to the winning side of the game with the Rochester Rockets. Steve, it just seems like every week somebody else is stepping up for Rochester, and you need that when you're making a deep playoff run. But the names just continue to roll out of guys making big plays week in and week out for this Rockets team.
Yeah, Mike, when we were tasked at the end of the broadcast to come up with a player of the game, my partner Chris McLeod and I were sitting there looking at what everybody had done in that game, and I said, "Hey, it's just got to be the Gregory family because Cordell and Corbin and Cornell all had key moments in that. Whether it's a kickoff return for a touchdown or whether it's the in essence game-ending interception in the end zone or two more touchdowns, right? So the entire Gregory family was just terrific in this one. And I think one of the keys of the game was the Rockets special teams. Again, it's the kickoff return for a touchdown and just how that quickly answers back and just deflates an offense that went out there and scored. And then they've got to get right back out there to try to do it again. Maybe when they thought they could stop Rochester on a drive and get the lead for the first time in that game. And then that opportunity just vaporizes in, a matter of 10 or 15 seconds on a kickoff return. But yeah, player after player, Evram Tabag, a sophomore, has been really, really big in the postseason. So far for Everin, he's got 4 of his 5 touchdowns on the season in the postseason. So, as teams go deep into these games, you have to have some extra weapons or somebody else just arrive at the moment. And the Rockets have had that.
So let's look at the semifinal matchup. They take on Breeze Central. You can, if you want, we could talk about a common opponent that was so early in the year with Mount Zion, with the Rochester Rockets beating them, Breeze Central falling to them. But what are we looking at for this game? And Tim, let me ask you, I'm going to start with you. What did you see from Rochester in that victory over SHG that you think can propel them to a state title game and a victory over Breeze Central?
Rochester is the same team with different guys year after year after year. They have pounded Breeze Central in the playoffs before. They should win handily on Saturday, but I'm always reminded that their coach, like Derek Leonard, like John Allison, like Mark Rounds, he's an Illinois college guy. So maybe he comes up with a strategy to keep them in the game as long as possible. But no, Rochester should win because they're the better team.
Derek, what do you see from this matchup between the Rockets and Breeze Central?
Yeah, just going out to practice this week and talking with Derek Leonard on the sideline while the defense was doing their work. Derek has the utmost respect for the Breeze Central coach and what he's done with that program. And like Tim said, they've seen him in the playoffs before, but I think Breeze feels like this team is obviously special. This is the first time they've made the semifinals. They have a big group of seniors that they, have really relied on, and I think they've gotten a lot better throughout the season. So yeah, you can compare, the common opponent, but at this point in the year, I don't think that matters a ton in terms of, what team you're going to see on the field. And just a couple videos I've seen, from Breeze Central, just how close this team is and how motivated they are. They seem like, a really good group of guys. And as Derek said, very disciplined. They understand their jobs and they're going to be tough to stop. But like Tim said, too, I think everybody in the state would say Rochester's the favorite. They're used to being that favorite. Obviously being at home helps them a ton, but you have to play the game. And in the semifinals, we've seen Derek only lose, I think, one time, and that was up, at Bishop. And so that was obviously a few years ago, but I mean, that's one of those situations where at home, Derek's going to be prepared, and the Rockets, looked really good coming off of a overtime win over SHG.
Steve, let's go to you, kind of the breaking down the opponent, but I also want to ask you, how much is last year's first round loss still in the back of the minds of some of these players on this team?
Oh, I think they think about it, but you're at a point now where the season, you'll define the season now on your own without thinking too much about anything that has happened in the past. If anything, I think that kind of hung over them heavily week 1, maybe a little bit even more week 2 with a more formidable opponent in Waterloo. And now that is mostly, erased to a whole year ago, and they're in the semifinals. I think it's just a different attitude, and they've accepted, they've charted their own history. They've written their own story so far, and now it's really up to them to complete the Rochester standard, which is to get to a state championship game.
But they have to go through Breeze Central. What have you heard about the opponent? Derek kind of touched upon a little bit the closeness, amount of seniors. What are you hearing from the coaching staff at Rochester?
And it's a nasty football team. So Cole Davis is an all-state linebacker, all-state running back. He's exceptionally tough, over 1,000 yards rushing. Hits just as hard on defense as he runs on offense. 22 touchdowns for him on the offensive side of things. If they look like anybody, if they remind you of anybody, they're going to remind you of just a little bit of what SHG does. And now they've got a sophomore quarterback who's starting the way Cam Brinkman started a year ago as a sophomore. And he's got Cam Brinkman attributes. He's not an all-stater yet, but he looks like the way that Cam Brinkman operates. He's thrown for, a couple thousand yards. He's the team's second leading rusher. And so that offense and what they like to do, they throw the ball to about 3 or 4 different receivers. Nobody quite like Drew Ward on that team. But Breeze is just a very, very balanced operation, and they've got the tendencies that I think the Cyclones have. And on defense, they just play downhill, Mike, and they are ready to step up and to hit anybody that pops through a hole with the ball. And one thing I wanted to mention today is we're looking back over the Rochester stats. They've got 2,740 yards rushing. They've got 2,718 yards passing. So think about that when SHG or Breeze or whoever it might be prepares for the Rockets, and you ask that question, how do you prepare for this Rocket team? Well, what do you want to slow down? 2,700 yards of passing or 2,700 yards of rushing? Again, the Rockets are here at the tail end of a season with nearly identical marks, both passing and running the ball. It's really something.
And the amazing part of that, and maybe Derek, I'll throw it to you on this one. The amazing part of that is the amount of different people. It's not one quarterback, it's two. It's a stable of running backs, but yet, to Steve's point, it's still the same outcome.
Yeah, it's next man up approach. Last week, actually the previous 2 weeks, Nate Swaney's been the go-to guy kind of on offense, catching the ball and doing some running. And then, he kind of went out for a couple minutes with an injury, and the next guy just stepped in and stepped up. And, like Steve said earlier, the Gregory brothers, just how many different options they have. And then you throw in, the option of one of them being a quarterback as well. So you kind of have 3 quarterbacks that Derek trusts to do everything. I don't know how you prepare for it. I don't know how you stop it, but I mean, that's not even talking about Caden Stout, who's an all-state running back. And there's just so many different options, and there's guys getting healthy and getting back. Like Eli Cox hasn't played much on offense since week 9 because of that injury. But I mean, in a pinch, I bet they're willing to throw him in there because he's pretty darn good at catching the ball as well.
So all that being said, we'll go around the horn here like we end all of these past playoff editions of the high school football preview show. Tim, I'll start with you. Rochester advances if?
Rochester advances if they score 21 to 28 more points than Breeze Central, which I predicted.
All right. You can find him on sportsbet.com. Tim's Picks, sponsored by Circa Sports. Steve, the Rochester Rockets win and advance to the state finals if?
Well, they're going to have to slow down the Breeze running game. They're going to attack a Breeze offense that looks a lot like SHG, so there's a lot of familiarity there. But then you also got a lot on tape to show Breeze in the manner in which that maybe, a Steve Beaker-led defense would like to slow them down. So I think it's control the quarterback, slow down the all-state tailback, and then offensively, there were moments again in that overtime victory over SHG where the game was again controlled just within the trenches, a little bit on the Rochester defensive line. But Tim had mentioned, what a job SHG did in protecting Brinkman. So if they can pressure the Breeze quarterback more successfully with real sacks, more tackles for losses instead of just QB pressures, that's a big key. And then up front, can those Rochester offensive linemen, when needed to, when it's important and critical to play a little bit of ball control, can they grind out, a long 70, 80-yard drive with all those 2,700 yards rushing that they've helped amass in the first place? And can they just kind of, in one of those moments, salt away a victory for the Rockets in the semifinals?
Yeah, sometimes a 4-minute drill much more important even than the 2-minute drill when it comes to the playoffs. So, Derek, I'll give you the final thought. The Rochester Rockets advance the championship game if?
Stay disciplined and don't make the big mistakes and like those big plays or, a pick six or whatever. Because, the time that, you thought about things in the Waterloo game was when, the defense kept jumping off sides. And, if you stay disciplined and do what you need to do, your offense is going to score. You know that with Derek. So you just have to, continue to put up those points and get a stop or two. And then you start to do the math. And that's just how Rochester beats you is, they're just consistently going to score and then get a few stops. Go check out the defensive line piece that I put up this week, because that unit has done so well this year in terms of just putting that pressure on a quarterback and on an offensive line to where they're really hungry and really excited. So I think it kind of just comes down to discipline.
So, Steve, you get the honors of calling the game. Where can people find it this Saturday? How can they listen in, even though I know it's going to be a packed house there, as it was this past week as well?
It will be packed, but DP just told me. So we got the Pythagorean theorem, but then there's also some like Leonard theorem that determines it's just math the way Rochester wins these games. Which we got to look. That'll be the next piece that DP does is the math and the formula that Derek Leonard and others put together to win this one. Well, if you want to hear the formula in action, 97.7 FM, 970 AM, the WMAY app or WMAY.com. We are everywhere, and bring your radio or bring your smartphone and listen on the app when you come out to Rocket Booster on Saturday for the game.
Yes, you and Chris do a fantastic job. Derek, you do a fantastic job as well. Great season for you, Tim and Darren. The coverage we give is top notch, and it's all because of you guys. So thank you so much for taking the time this week. And here's hoping that we have a state championship game to break down next week here on the High School Football Preview Show.
Catch the High School Football Preview Show live every Friday night at 6 on 97.7 and 970 WMAY. Listen to the podcast and watch the replay online at WMAY.com.